Hi, I'm Bill Wilt of Assured Research. Thanks so much for joining what will be a short webinar here on the topic of property insurance and the changing nature of property risks. This is drawn from our July Assured briefing. If you're a subscriber, we hope you have you find this interesting, and it encourages you to read the note. If you're not a subscriber, you find this interesting, reach out to us. We'd be happy to start you on a trial to our work. The catalyst for this note was a recent actuarial seminar that I attended, where there was a recurring theme throughout many of the sessions on property insurance and reinsurance and the changing nature of risks, for all the obvious reasons that I won't belabor at this point, because many of you viewers will know the nature of what's happening in the reinsurance markets and the rising prices and capacity constraints, and then in turn the pressures that's putting on primary insurers to manage their exposures, leading to decisions in some cases to stop writing new business in states like California, where insurers see meaningful catastrophe risk that they don't feel that they can adequately price for. But let's get back to this research note, where a specific catalyst, and with thanks to a smart presentation put on by Arthur Gallagher Ree, focused on the peril of hail, and what they showed was that severe convective storm losses, hail and tornado, let's say together, severe convective storm losses have grown by about 11.5% per annum, really century to date. That's a pretty substantial trend line. They go further and break down the components of that 11.5%. And what I'll just say here is that 4.5% of the 11.5% was attributable to growth in the housing stock, movement in areas prone to severe convective storms, and urban sprawl. I'll leave our research note or their note, if you want to pursue it, to explain the rest of that 11.5%. But the topic of urban sprawl caught our attention. Because we've been aware for some time and have focused on the changing nature of exposures within the United States. And it's been clear that urban and suburban counties and metropolitan areas have grown much more rapidly, let's say in the 2000s, than have rural areas. And it occurs to us, and we think we have some evidence to support this, that if you think about, say, Tornado Alley and what I'll call Dixie Alley, that portion of the southeast U.S. that's seemingly increasingly exposed to severe convective storms, think hail, strong wind, and tornado, were the populations in those counties kind of growing either randomly or in proportion to the current distribution of population? You would simply see, the insured losses from severe convective storms rising kind of across the distribution, kind of a straight up increase. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is that the populations are growing in kind of lumpy and clumpy fashions around suburbs that are expanding. And so with that growth, you get not only an increase in the overall expected loss, but it changes the nature of the distribution of losses, and it fattens the tail because you've got more buildings, more people, more buildings, more roof area in these ever larger suburbs, that when they are hit by severe convective storms, the losses can be really high, a fattening of the tail. Part one, and we'll have a slide for that. The second section of this note, again, the theme being the changing nature of property exposures, focuses on coastal hurricane risks. And I'll just leave you here with the takeaways, again, with returning with a slide. So there are 8 states that bear the brunt of U.S. hurricane exposure. Those 8 states account for 92% of the land strikes in the last 100 years. Within those 8 states, there are 98 coastal counties. The growth rate, the population growth rate from the 2010 to 2020 census was 12.5%, 12.7% to be specific, in those 98 counties, and that compares to just a 7.4% growth rate for the entire country. So an almost kind of sort of twice as fast growth in coastal counties over that 10-year period as compared to the rest of the United States. Now that's well understood and known, already on your radar screens, already baked into your models. But what we did with a focus on growth from 2020 to 2022 is identify 14 counties, part of that 98, where population growth continues to be very rapid. They're reasonably large counties, and they already have high levels of hurricane exposure. And in those counties, we'd suggest that companies' time would be well spent making sure that risk aggregation and catastrophe modeling is adequate, so you all understand your exposures well. Let me share my screen, and we're going to go to the slides. There we go. Okay, good. You can hopefully see that. Let me just do the slideshow. And again, this is from our July Assured briefing, where we'd be happy to share it with you if you're not a subscriber, and start you on a trial. Now this shows, again, the changing nature of property risk, focuses on hail on the left and tornado on the right. And what we're doing is using FEMA's tool called the National Risk Index, which we use with some frequency, and think highly of it as a useful tool, particularly for monitoring the relative risks. And we're looking at the difference in blue in both graphs is the change in population over the 2010 to 2020 period in a number of counties, which I'll explain. And in the red is the change from their first version of their national risk model, which used was kind of calibrated on the 2010 census, population building, distribution, and value of buildings and so forth, albeit with inflation built in to get those values to, I think, the 2022 period. And then the NRI's most recent model, where the population distribution and the building distribution and inventory is calibrated based on the 2020 and much more recent census. Again, inflation is not going to be a big difference here because they try to adjust for inflation. So really what we're looking at on the left is changes in population from 2010 to 2020. That is about 12.1%, and look at the dramatic increase, the much higher increase in the expected annual loss from hail in these counties. Now, importantly, what are those counties? We picked here 10 counties that are part of or adjacent to or encompass really rapid growing suburbs in Tornado Alley or Dixie Alley, kind of south and southeast US. So these are rapidly growing counties, 12.1%, population growth compared to just 7% over the 2010 to 2020 period. So populations are growing quickly, yes, but look how much faster the growth is in the expected annual loss from hail. Similar in the tornado, when we look the tornado peril, when we look to the right, same counties, same 12.1% growth in population, a much sharper rise in expected losses from tornado. We are highlighting here that there are a few of those counties where the NRI also changed their parameters from kind of, let's call it version 1 to version 2 of their national risk index. So there's going to be some parameter changes in there as well. But the point we'd want to leave you with is that, yes, perils and expected losses from hail and tornado are rising because populations are rising. But we would submit, although it's not easily observed in this data, but this data kind of hints at it, that when the population is growing rather than kind of randomly or in proportion to the say the pre-existing population, but instead the suburbs are getting bigger, and the suburbs, which means urban sprawl, is getting bigger. There's more roofs, more buildings to knock down by tornadoes, and more roofs to hit from hail in that kind of lumpy, clumpy fashion. That changes the distribution of loss. Again, rather than just raising the aggregate distribution, it both raises it and fattens the tail because of that kind of clumpiness from urban sprawl. So we hope that makes sense. We also, in this note, kind of ask the question of, should maybe smaller and mutual companies think about portfolio swaps as a way of, if they've got concentrations in different parts of hail or tornado alley, maybe one way to mitigate the cost of reinsurance and get around some of the capacity issues is to engage in portfolio swaps. So we offer that for consideration and invite feedback. When we switched on the topic of the changing nature of property risk to coastal hurricanes, again, the four main areas in the U.S. will be of no surprise. That's not our focus here. It's, South Florida, Dade, Broward counties, Miami, etc., Houston, Tampa Bay, St. Pete, and the New Orleans area. Peak risks, well known, well understood. Those peak risks keep getting bigger. But what we did was look again at the 98 counties and the 98 coastal counties in the 8 states that account for 92% of U.S. land strikes over the last 100 years. And specifically, we screened for counties that are of decent size, population greater than 100,000. They've experienced rapid population growth just in the last 2 years, the 2020 to 2022 census. So we screened on a 4% population growth. That's compared to just a 0.5% population growth over that 2-year period. So they're growing at a multiple of the U.S. national average. And those that already showed, using the most recent version of the National Risk Index, a high level of hurricane risk, as measured here by expected annual loss from hurricane divided by population. And what you see there, again, 14 counties, most of them are in Florida, 1 in Alabama, and then in North and South Carolina. Again, think of these as those counties that just over the last 2 years could be experiencing a really sharp increase in exposure from hurricanes. It would be our expectation, I suppose, but also our hope that insurance companies and reinsurance companies have these counties on their radar screen and are kind of incorporating them and incorporating them into their risk management programs and modeling them carefully because of the changing nature of risk. So that's what we had for you. Thank you for joining. And again, we welcome inquiries and hope that you all can come back and perhaps take out a trial to our work. So with that, I'll say thank you and have a good rest of your day.